Hello and welcome to Something About the Beatles, episode 241. We've been on a kind of roll of serious or semi-serious topics, and there are more to come in the can right now. But it is late summer. We are approaching, in the U.S., the Labor Day weekend, which is traditionally signaling the end of summer. And I thought before summer disappeared completely, though technically we've got another month to go, it would be fun to do something light and return to the well that we started, I guess, late last year with Gary Wenstrup, which is Beatles Olympiad. Us going through the Beatles album catalog and ranking gold, silver, and bronze of our favorite cuts of the moment as we record the shows. So I was a little skeptical about doing this in the first place, I must admit, but they were a lot of fun to do. I guess you as the listeners seem to be getting some fun out of them. So in that spirit, we will continue to do them before returning back to the heavy topics down the road in future shows. So we're getting to a very sweet spot in Beatle history and chronology, 1966. Where we left off, we had done Rubber Soul and then kind of did a left turn pivot into the U.S. album issued on Capitol in June of 66, Yesterday and Today, being that Frankenstein Monster cribbed from the UK Rubber Soul, the pending Revolver, making it what to many was a abomination in the US, as well as some stray singles. So that was where we left off. So that leaves us to next tackle Revolver, as you know by seeing the graphic accompanying this episode. So it is the UK one, of course, but there was one more release in the UK that year, and yes, we go into our opinions on that one as well. That will be in the second hour of the conversation. This one we're still working our way through Revolver. And anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say. I don't really like to belabor the intros of these shows before we start getting into them. I put out that call for lawyers a while back. I got something far bigger and better than I bargained for that you will be hearing on an upcoming show. There is so much to tackle on this subject involving litigation among the Beatles, and there was a specific topic I had in mind, but the person who nominated themselves came up with something far richer, more interesting, way ahead of the curve as far as a topic of discussion goes. So you've got that to look forward to, as do I. And beyond that, let's see. Oh, yeah, we got some other stuff. Well, you'll hear it when you hear it. And here we go. Take it away, Gary Wenstrup with Beatles Olympiad 66.
I'm looking forward to jumping into Revolver. This one got hard, and I'm guessing it might be hard for you. You did a terrific book about Revolver all by itself. So I'm going to guess you've got a lot on your mind when it comes to Revolver.
10 years gone. But, you know, the thing about it is that, first of all, it's so long ago, I've forgotten what it's all about anyway, to quote John Lennon. But the other thing is that for the purposes of our conversation, we've talked about in the course of our discussions that when art affects you and reaches you, there's no justification needed. It makes you feel something, and therefore, I've made a real conscious effort through the years, starting out as kind of a wonky rock guy, where I was parroting a lot of what I read back in rock journalism to try to justify things. I was very much of that world in my teens and through a great deal of my 20s or so, until I kind of woke up.
I want to interrupt for just 1 minute. I just read something that was interesting, and it was about sort of girl fandom.
I'm a fan of girls.
But the girls like what they like, and boys have to be told what to like.
Huh.
And I thought that was fascinating because I think there's some truth to it that girls gravitate to something and they flock to it. And boys need to have rock critics tell them, like, yeah, that's cool, or they have to legitimize things.
So does that suggest a self-consciousness about expressing what you like by boys, and that they feel a need to justify it, whereas girls don't care about being called out on what they like?
Yeah, I think so.
That's interesting. I've not thought about that, but on the surface, I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Dr. Christine and Aaron and Allison might push back because they are of that world, and that might be a good conversation to have one day on the show. I would like to have that conversation, but on the surface, do you remember where you saw this? Like, who was saying? Was that a guy that was saying this?
I don't remember.
Okay. Just out of curiosity.
I just thought it was a cool observation that I'd never thought about before.
That is interesting. And so what I've been leading to with this is that I can justify things I like all day long for intellectual reasons. Like this was historically important, and therefore, because this collaboration or this was used for the first time or something like that, I can do that all day long. But number one, it's just sort of excuses, whether it's valid or not in terms of, well, that is a legitimate point. But beside the point when it comes to art affecting you, whether any of these facts that happen to be true or not, you're still going to like what you like. It's still going to move you absent any of that stuff. You can be really smitten by something, really moved by it without any quantifiable reason for it. And I think that's a pure form of expressing how art has affected you. So you brought up my Revolver book and what thoughts I may have. I'm trying to divorce that from ever having happened when discussing Revolver in terms of what I like, because I could spit that shit out all day and it's beside the point. I will talk about it in terms of how something moved me, but at the same time, maybe part of what moves me is something quantifiable. And if that's the case, I'll say so. But, there's some things you like. There's probably, okay, here's a great example. Plenty of fans I've learned through the course of this show love When I Get Home. And I think part of the reason for my expressed disdain for it was because I thought it was clunky and the words were awkward. But that aside, I've come around to the opinion, well, that may or may not be true, but it's kind of beside the point when it comes to if you like the song. And honestly, there's an appeal to that song to me. I'm not saying I think it's one of the greats or anything, but there's something I find appealing about that song in its awkwardness.
Fair enough.
Okay. So what about your own thought process and what you chose? Just before naming any names, how did you approach it?
I tried to approach it with songs that have just stood up to me, that have stood the test of time best. And I'm also trying to remember how I felt the initial time I heard it as well, to see if the songs that appeal to me now appealed to me then. And for me, I heard these albums in real time, though I was real young.
I was going to ask you that. So if you've got like a very direct first impression connection when this stuff was new.
I do.
Does that still return to you like when you hear these songs now? There's certain songs been played nonstop for decades, and it's almost like that freshness is removed. However, to evoke a song on this album, there's still a big part of me that if I hear Got to Get You Into My Life on the radio, brings me back to 1976.
When it was released as a single.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So for me, it's not direct. I've never really shared this, but for whatever it's worth, my first exposure to the Beatles was their cartoons.
Oh, sure.
On Saturday morning television. And from there, when I had a babysitter, I'm the oldest of six. So when I was a young kid, I wasn't really old enough to babysit the others. So my folks had babysitters. And I would badger them to bring their music with them when they came to our house.
Albums.
So they brought Meet the Beatles and Beatles 65. And those were my introduction. That was my gateway into the Beatles. I fell in love with both of them. And then it just went from there. So about this time, right about now, I'm sort of in real time. So I got Revolver, but I was only 8 years old. But I listened to it and loved it back to back. And the one thing I'm noticing about listening to songs now versus then, when I was listening to them then, I didn't judge them at all. I kind of loved and enjoyed Yellow Submarine to the same degree that I loved and enjoyed Tomorrow Never Knows. There wasn't a lot of judgment in it. It was just Beatle music, and I kind of loved it all.
And it wasn't bizarre to you because you didn't have this frame of reference of what music was supposed to sound like.
No, it sounded strange, but to me, it was just another Beatles song to enjoy.
And Yellow Submarine can be perceived as strange to certain people because it is so novel and unlike everything else, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And you don't have this sense listening to Tomorrow Never Knows as a child necessarily of anything apocalyptic or profound. It's just a collection of interesting sounds with a beat in a steady rhythm to it and whatever hooks may be there. So that is a really pure way of absorbing art. Because you're not bringing any preconceptions to the table, right?
Right. And as an 8-year-old, I didn't have a lot of preconceptions.
Right. Well, what I find fascinating, this whole thing is fascinating because you never talked about it before, that was your gateway drug. How many kids were you? 8, 6, 8?
I was the oldest of 6.
6, okay. So Brady Bunch, that'll stick in my head. As the oldest, it wasn't as though you had older siblings introducing you to this music. It was older children as babysitters, right?
Yeah.
So they were of the fandom demographic.
Exactly. But they weren't introducing me to it. I was demanding it of them.
Yeah.
Because I heard the songs not demanding, asking of them. Because I had heard the songs on the radio and I love the Beatles. I love that cartoon.
And at some point you realized they had the goods. And so, hey, when you're coming over anyway.
Yeah, bring the albums.
So is that how you got into Simon and Garfunkel and all this other stuff, Motown, things that are big to you in adulthood?
No, the Beatles was the only thing that they brought because I was kind of too young and I probably just didn't understand records and albums and where to buy them and all that kind of stuff yet. But by the time we get to Revolver, actually, so I was always a good student, but my parents, if you got a good report card, they'd buy an album for me. I was going to do it anyway. It's just the way I'm wired. But so this is one of the albums I got because I got good grades one particular year.
So it came out in summer. So presumably, was it by Christmas 66 you got it? I mean, your first report card would have been what, October 66?
But it could have been at the mid-semester point,
Yeah, by Christmas break or something?
Right. My memory is not that sharp.
Do you still have these original pressings from back in the day?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Well, I have a huge collection of albums.
But you know if it's the originals?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
Okay, I'm just interested in the original Swirl Capital label, if that's what you've got, or...
Oh, they were. I don't know whether I still have them, but they were the original label, and man, are they scratched up.
Did you write your name on the jacket?
Probably.
Okay. People do that stuff.
And actually, I remember, so when I got the early Beatles, that album, Sgt. Pepper was out. So you remember the album cover for the early Beatles. It's the picture with them and there's leaves in the background.
Yeah, it's Hyde Park 64 autumn.
Okay. So because I had Sgt. Pepper, don't ask me why, I thought it would be cool to draw the mustaches on the cover of the early Beatles. So again, you can tell how the lack of maturity I have at this particular point.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you still have that?
I don't know.
Oh, man.
Next time we talk, I'll let you know. I'll rummage through my album collection.
That is so cool. Wow. So what I'm wondering, listening to you talk about all this stuff in your first exposure and this all being of a piece, is you're watching the Beatle cartoons, and a lot of that is heavily focused on the earlier Beatles stuff, the first few albums. And then Revolver comes along, you're still watching Beatle cartoons. Were you able to mesh those? Because it's like completely different experience, what you're hearing on Revolver versus the ridiculousness of the cartoons.
I think by the time Revolver came out, I had stopped watching the cartoons. We had moved from Cincinnati to Detroit, and maybe I watched them in Cincinnati, but they weren't, or I couldn't find them in Detroit or something. I don't know. Okay. So by the time Revolver comes around, I'm not engaged in the cartoons anymore.
Now, when you listen to, obviously, at least as of the 80s, when the whole world snapped into the British configurations come the CD era, do you remember at what point you first heard the British Revolver?
It wouldn't have been until the CD era.
Not even in the 70s? You never picked up on vinyl?
No. I mean, I was aware of it, but I never invested in it.
Uh-huh.
I'm not a collector, so I knew the songs from Yesterday and Today or wherever, so I didn't feel like I needed to buy the album.
You see, I, on the other hand, came from a father who was very acquisitive and felt the need to, if you're going to get into something, you must have a library in your house of whatever that something is. And so he had a massive LP collection and reel-to-reel tape as well. And it took me, I don't know, maybe a year and a half of fandom after the Red and Blue albums came out to acquire the entire Capitol catalog. And that was basically the end of the Edge of Earth, as far as I was concerned, until I recognized through Illustrated Record these British releases. Oh, look, Meet the Beatles has a black and white cover in England, and it's called With the Beatles. And I can't pin it to an exact time, but I was aware that British product was very different. At least some of it was. And different album covers and, Hard Day's Night is completely different, stuff like that. So I know that as finances would allow, started to pick up foreign releases here and there. You'd find out bits of information like there was something released in Holland called Beatles Greatest. And if you had that pressing, All My Loving has the hi-hat tap intro to it, the count off. And it's like, wow, I got to have that. So I started picking up these oddball things. Gem Records, you might remember seeing those in record stores, big sticker. So I got Beatles Beat. It's a compilation circa 64 of a lot of some B-sides and with the Beatles era tracks that I think still holds up because it's sort of the overseas equivalent of Beatles' second album. It sounds like a thematic collection, almost like a semi-live performance. And I enjoyed the hell out of it. It just sounded great. So I was picking up oddball things, but it wasn't until like 78, 79 when that blue box of the LPs came out and it had the rarities disc in it. And that was like $125 purchase at the time. And working whatever jobs I was working, I saved up for that thing and I bought it. So that gave me in one fell swoop all the British releases. That was how I acquired them all, whatever and beyond whatever I already had. For the purposes of this Olympiad, we're not going to do a separate US and UK revolver because the only difference is subtraction. And it's not like Rubber Soul where it was actually tracks that originated somewhere else popping up on there. So we can talk about them as one and not two different releases. But it took a long time to not be jarred by I'm Only Sleeping popping on after Eleanor Rigby for me. Yeah. And things like that. It's like, wow, this is weird. But that's how programmed I was by the Capitol releases.
Sure, me too.
But as a listening experience, it was just kind of odd because you had great familiarity going into it with the Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby, plus the 3 tracks from Yesterday and Today. And then they put out the single release of Got to Get You Into My Life. So it was a weird, semi-familiar album.
Yeah, but coming from different places and different times. Yeah.
So to ever really hear it as of one piece took a long, long time as a U.S. listener of a certain age.
Yeah, and even longer for me since I waited for the CD era. So I hear you.
Yeah. So looking at it critically, it's almost impossible not having been of age in 66 to really hear it the way it was meant to be heard in that spirit. My experience with the album is too broken up, but I can intellectually appreciate it and listen to it. And plus, having done what I did with the book, all the research into how it was made and all that stuff. So it definitely might be unique in the Beatles canon in the way I hear it because of the fragmentary nature of exposure to it.
And do you think that affected your enjoyment of it or the selections you're going to make?
I think it just made me lament that I didn't get to experience it like other people. But what's true of me has got to be true of millions of Americans.
Well, when you say you didn't get a chance to experience it like other people, like other English people or like other American people?
Yeah, I suppose English people, or experience it the way the Beatles intended it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to get a Beatles album when there's more George Harrison tunes than John Lennon tunes is just a little bit sideways.
Unprecedented.
It's not a little bit sideways. It's a lot sideways.
Yeah, never to be repeated again.
Yeah.
So to get into it, let's go with your bronze.
Sure. My bronze is Here, There, and Everywhere, which I think is one of Paul's favorite songs, which we can talk about.
And one of John's favorite Paul songs.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's one of the reasons sometimes when Paul is interviewed that he names it as his favorite song. He pulls out the John reference. Beautifully constructed. I mean, the lyrics, people don't tend to talk about Paul's lyrics, but it's changing my life with a wave of her hand. That's beautiful. It shows the power of that love. Someone is speaking, but she doesn't know he's there. That's beautiful too. She's so into him. He's so into her. Those are really evocative, strong lines.
I'm getting chills as you say that.
Aren't they fabulous? Watching her eyes and hoping I'm always there, hoping I'm always in her gaze. Man.
That's an interesting choice. And you look at it as sort of a reflection of the way we perceive of Paul McCartney, who's, at that point in his life, or whatever he thinks of Jane Asher, he's womanizing left, right, and center. And so he's not committing, he's hoping, he's aspiring. Maybe she'll look past this, but maybe not.
Yeah. And as we know, Paul doesn't tend to write about his own life. He creates what he's going to write about, generally speaking.
Not directly. And it's funny that it's part of the Beatle lore that so many mid-period Paul songs were inspired by Jane Asher, and they tend to be after arguments. I'm looking through you for no one, another girl, and things like that. Maybe that's what gets him fired up, that I'm going to write a song about this, damn it. That seems to get him going. To be Paul McCartney's muse at the height of Beatlemania, I guess it cuts both ways.
Yeah. To me, the song feels very constructed, working in the here, into the there, and then paying off in the everywhere, where I don't necessarily feel it's got a personal connection to his relationship. Do you feel that way?
I think that he might have said as much, or other people have. It's non-specific enough. It could be about anyone or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And as you noted, if he's being autobiographical, he tends to be a lot more obscure about it than John. John has a very definite way, and part of it is just the quality of his voice, where he sounds like he's conveying something absolutely personal. Paul seems to approach each song the way an actor approaches a character. It's like he casts himself. And very specifically, this is in the Revolver book, that he said that when he did this very song, he was trying to channel Marianne Faithfull.
What, as Tears Go By, Marianne Faithfull, or Marianne Faithfull the woman?
I guess musically, he was trying to sound like her, and they did, in fact, speed it up a little bit to get his voice a little bit higher pitch, but that was what he was going. He was adapting that character, that costume, for the delivery of this song. Beyond what he'd already written and arranged, it's like, okay, for the song to work the way I hear it working, I'm going to do a Marianne Faithfull on it. And because he's not Marianne Faithfull, he's a male, he will have covered his tracks enough, but hearing in his own head, that's what he wanted to put out there.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before. So in essence, the Rolling Stones have influenced this song.
Yeah, in essence, right. And everybody thinks it's the Beach Boys.
That's interesting.
It does have that kind of in my room quality to it, of course.
Sure. And that's part of the beauty of the song. There's a stillness to it that's enjoyable as well. I do have one quibble with it.
Uh-oh.
And I'm curious your opinion. The background vocals, they're terrific.
Uh-huh.
But I feel like they're mixed too loud.
Oh.
I feel like they're just too in the foreground for background vocals. And I wonder about your opinion of it, number one. And number two, I wonder about saving those background vocals for the third verse, whether it would have been a more interesting song to have Paul as the lead vocalist, the first two verses, and save the background vocals for the third verse. Your thoughts?
There are no right or wrong answers when it comes to an arrangement, just preference. And I get where you're coming from. That makes sense. There's sort of a payoff to it.
Yeah.
And that's a perfectly legitimate thought. It's funny, along those lines, I'd always had the thought that Summer Breeze by Seals and Croft, the late great Dash Croft, is that the one who just died? Yeah. Where it comes out of the bridge and goes into that last verse, and there's that big swell of background vocal for the first two lines of the last verse. And then it dies away instead of building on it. I always thought you just drop the bottom out of it. Now, as a mature person, I could say, okay, well, you didn't want to overplay it. That's fine. But I remember as a kid and for years after thinking, you've got this great crescendo here, and then it just goes away. Why?
Yeah.
And so I can hear what you're saying there in terms of a payoff. You want that payoff. You're expecting it from years of listening to music, and it's not there. Or they diminished its power by using it too much.
Right.
In my own perception of the song, I can see them thinking, well, we're going for, if Marianne Faithfull was a Beach Boy, that's what we're going for in the song. So we got to have it stacked with vocals from start to finish. So maybe that's what their thought process was.
You covered a lot of bases with that one statement there.
And George Martin said, okay.
A curiosity about the song to me, because it's this sweet stillness love song to it, that he does the finger snaps in that last verse. I like it fine. It's just an interesting choice.
Yeah. I also like in the same part that descending doubling of the vocal, where they, instead of watching her eyes, where it goes down instead of staying with it. Nice touch.
Yes, agreed.
Only does it once.
Yeah. Full of nice touches. All Beatles songs, right? Full of nice touches.
And when you think about it, you think about where he came from as a composer, arranger, musician on Rubber Soul. He's coming off the heels of Yesterday, which he had in his pocket a long time, ends up on Help as just an album track. As we've talked about on the show, side 2 is just so kind of thrown together. It's just so random, doesn't seem programmed at all. And then that song that they don't know what to do with, they're very self-conscious about. And there's this back and forth. Should we credit it to Paul? Should we put it out as a single? Capitol says, well, screw you guys. We're putting it out. Try to stop us. And it becomes this number 1 hit. And it gives them the validation to do something outside the Beatle paradigm in terms of sonic presentation. I have to think that emboldens them going into the Rubber Soul sessions. It's like, okay, we can break out of this box that we'd imposed on ourselves, thinking maybe you're not going to accept too radical a divergence from our prevailing sound to this point, although they always advanced and always didn't want to repeat themselves. So Rubber Soul, I think, is informed by the success of Yesterday, the validation of Yesterday. So you see Paul, even though Michelle is something that's been in his pocket for a while, going back to the earliest days in Liverpool, that sort of art student thing he used to pull off. But now he finishes it, gets Ivan Vaughan's wife to help him with the French part of the lyrics. And I'm Looking Through You, which is kind of bizarre, rustic sounding, almost Dylan-esque in its roughness presentation. You've got You Won't See Me, Drive My Car, this Motown-esque R&B workout, all these things that Paul's putting on the table. He's just shotgunning his stylistic influences. And then when it comes to pure songcraft, marrying lyrics to melody and determining the best way to present these things, I think it reaches a major flowering on Revolver. For that song, very much so. Eleanor Rigby, For No One. You think about his contributions where he's casting a song for Ringo with Yellow Submarine. I just love the idea of kids going around singing this chorus, because his head is so bursting with musical ideas and stylistic influences. Everything is fair game. He manages to really up his game lyrically and arrangement-wise with the stuff. Got to Get You Into My Life. All these different pastiches of different styles all over the place on that record. And then what comes after that? The McCartney-dominated conceptual piece of Sgt. Pepper. So, yeah, just that ascendancy. And again, this is not meant as, well, the music is great because of this, but you look at the context of the times. He's immersed in the London underground and art scene. He's the only one not married and not living out in the suburbs among the wealthy people. He is like immersed in this scene, and it's sort of fast tracking him along with the cultural education he's getting from the Asher family to be on this path. Absent any of that stuff, what would he have been producing then? Yeah.
I think you make a really good point that this album is a huge leap forward for Paul. That you make a very good point that I can't point a misfire on this album. And it's a huge step forward from what he's been doing the previous records. You make a very good point with that.
Yeah, for sure. And overall, that was sort of the point I was making with the book. And I want to keep belaboring this thing, but in a way that is not the same as Pepper, and it's not better or worse. It's just different. It's a different band on Revolver than it is on Pepper, in as much as you see a lot more of the four-way egalitarian, collaborative, pulling in the same direction, all four on virtually every track, than you do on Pepper, where it's a lot more dominated by one particular force. It has nothing to do with whether you enjoy certain songs or not. Two big examples being Tomorrow Never Knows or Taxman, where each individual Beatle contributed something hugely important to the overall finished track, whether it be something as direct as helping out with the lyrics, John contributing on Taxman, or George's tambura, this exotic sound, which now inextricably connects Eastern sounds to psychedelia on Tomorrow Never Knows. From then on in the 60s, you couldn't hear Indian-sounding instruments without thinking LSD or any of that stuff, for better or worse. And if you ask Ravi Shankar, he would have said worse. But that is all of them stepping up. And then the whole story of how Eleanor Rigby, the words happened to be finished, where very much who was in the room contributed very key things to it. So it is just amazing that they were that open and receptive. And we know that through the entire arc of their career, more than we have direct firsthand knowledge of, that was how they tended to work. Some instances we have more collaborative support for that, where somebody will say something years later, like, how long did it take us to find out that George came up with the riff for And I Love Her? Took decades and not in his lifetime, right?
Yeah.
But in the Get Back film, where you're seeing not only the four Beatles chiming in words and stuff like that as they're sitting around working through a song, Mel Evans.
Sure.
I think it is a real strength that they were willing to take a good idea no matter where it came from.
Well put. And I think part of the tension that starts to develop maybe around the White Album, or I sense it anyway, is that Paul's not as interested in group input, it seems.
Bingo.
And so we've got the whole John and Yoko tension, but I think there's a tension as well that Paul's a dictator and some of the fun and joy of recording goes out the window at that point.
What do you think George would say about that?
He would just sneer and walk away.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And that's another thing that is worth examining by somebody in Beatle world who knows what they're talking about and has the qualifications to bring to the table. Psychologically, what went on between 66 and 68, where you have this high point of four-way cooperation. The trope is that the White Album is the sound of the four solo careers starting. I think that's a little overstated, but definitely it's where that same spirit that informed 66 and maybe everything to that point, there's a breakdown in it. For everything strong and on the right side of history you could say about Paul in the later years of the Beatles, including Alan Klein, including pushing these guys into the next project without which we wouldn't have, you name it, from 67 onward. But at the same time, this auteur tendency, this is what we're going for. This is what I want on this. That less receptivity to taking input. You're in a band, for Christ's sake. Go make that solo record if that's what you want to do. But otherwise, this is what got you to this point.
Agreed. Though it is hard to second guess his judgment. I mean, his musical choices generally are spot on.
Yes, they are. That's the thing. In fact, we have the direct quote from the guys in the Ivies who became Badfinger when he's given them Come and Get It.
Yeah.
And, that whole story where what happened was the Ivies had been brought to Apple. Mel had been working with them, Tony Visconti, and they craft the Maybe Tomorrow album, put the single out. It does okay, not huge. Then put out the album. By the time the LP comes along, Klein is now installed at Apple. And because he didn't see them as a guaranteed hit-making act, he wasn't going to take them seriously or put the energy or time. And so that album doesn't come out in Britain or the US, but it goes out in West Germany and Holland and various other places around the world. It's sort of this half-hearted promotion of the band. And Tom Evans complains in one of the music papers about, we came to Apple and we were led to believe all this stuff and Beatles full-on involvement and support and we're just languishing. And he was lamenting their fate at that point. Paul reads this and he goes, okay, here's where I kill two birds with one stone. I'm supposed to do the soundtrack to Ringo's film, Magic Christian. And these guys are looking for something to get their career reignited back on track. I'll give them the song I wrote expressly for the film. They can record it, have their hit with it. So anyway, what I'm getting to is that when he's in the studio in the summer of 69, producing the session, he goes, I know it's a bit undignified, fellas, but you need to follow this to the letter. This is the hit sound.
And he's right.
Uh-huh. He is right.
Yeah.
But he can get away with it with those guys.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right, he can. He's their boss.
Right, they're not going to get the pushback that George and John are going to give him.
Sure. Wow, so that was a lengthy discussion on Here, There, and Everywhere. So that's my bronze. What's your bronze?
My bronze is I Want to Tell You from George.
Oh, okay. Great. Tell me why.
Love that song. Number one, and this is part of what informs my decisions, I don't like to, getting back to that whole circular discussion about choices being made for reasons and quantifications. But that aside, I would say that I tend to skew toward the less familiar than the more familiar. Like if we're discussing Help, I'm never going to say, well, Yesterday's my favorite track on the album, because that is so overfamiliar that you want to avoid it. You want to go to the unsung. I program my own playlists all the time, and you almost never will hear big hits in them. It's the less known stuff that excites me more. So anyway, I want to tell you, I love the hell out of everything about it in terms of the arrangement, that sort of off-kilter piano note, just the rhythm, everything about it, the lyric. It's just an odd rock song from a guy that increasingly through the years trafficked less and less with rock, at least edgier stuff for sure. And Taxman might be a little overfamiliar, and Love You Too is what it is. I love it, but it's not my favorite of his Indian flavored things. But I want to tell you, it's probably the most obscure of the three, of his three contributions to Revolver. And just everything about it, it's surprising. It transcends its time. It feels like a group effort. Certainly Paul's fingerprints are all over it. But Ringo's got a terrific drum sound on it and terrific fills.
Totally agree. And Paul's piano is terrific. I think really his piano sort of ups the drama. It heightens the drama in the song.
And there you go to contributing to songs that didn't originate with you. I don't see any way that George conceived what Paul plays on piano. I think Paul listened to it as like, I know what I can do here. And it enhances everything, lifts everything. So that's what these guys were doing all over the place. I mean, certainly throughout their career, but I think on this album in particular, you can point to different things contributed by the guy who didn't write the song that elevates it.
Yeah. So because of your drumming background, this song, I love it as you do.
Uh-huh.
It does feel off kilter, like it's having trouble finding the beat. Talk to me about that.
Well, the beat doesn't fall where you expect it to. There's a complete logic to it in the universe of I Want to Tell You, but it's unexpected. It's consistent. It's not random or not played properly. It just is not what your ear is expecting to hear. And that in and of itself, I think, is a really cool aspect of it where they're sort of confounding their audience.
Mm.
You know, the fade up and the fade out comes and swells and goes away. We know that it's informed by his acid experience without being psychedelic. And just the fact that his mind has all these thoughts and he is frustrated at his inability to convey them to somebody who hasn't been on the same trip, literally.
Mm. You could interpret it as he's singing to a new love interest. You could interpret it that way, or you could interpret it as just his struggle to communicate and to be understood sort of universally, or that we all struggle to be understood. So do you feel that he's singing to a person, or do you think he is singing about our sort of universal inability to connect and communicate? How do you see it?
I think it's George Harrison, therefore all of the above.
It's not about God.
Not quite. We're not quite into the God area just yet. Yeah. That would come in the autumn of '66. But his own inability to convey the grand notions that have come through him through his LSD experience at this point, but broke down on the macro level of a relationship to a girl, it completely works that way. And as we know in the years to come, where he does find God, spinning off these songs that work on a straight level as a relationship love song as much as an homage to the Almighty. He has it both ways. And so I think that was a trick that he really enjoyed playing with his compositions to give them as broad a range of appeal as possible, for sure.
Has he said specifically that this song was a reaction to his LSD experience?
I believe he has. And in fact, there is so much that he says in the lyrics, which thematically is about lamenting his inability to articulate what he really wants to say. But one of the things I found interesting is that years later, and this was something I picked up too without him saying it, that I thought didn't make as much sense as if he would change it. And he later on confirmed for me that he had the same thought. And it was underscored by when he did the song live in Japan, when he was touring with Clapton, is that if I seem to act unkind, it's only me, it's not my mind. And it isn't me, it's just my mind, makes more sense. And he said as much later on. So I thought that was a great insight. Does that make sense to you?
It does not. It's never made sense. It's never made sense either way.
Really?
Well, because I feel your mind is you.
Except he's trying to make the point that if I seem to act unkind, it's only me, it's not my mind. He's seeing them as two separate things, maybe like the id and the ego and all that really, if I'm unkind, it's my subconscious revealing something I wouldn't be so rude as to say out loud. When he says in the original lyric, it's only me, that makes it sound like I'm deliberately being unkind. Never mind my mind. My mind would never do that. And reversing it makes more sense to me, at least. It's like, if I'm unkind, it's because something from my subconscious that I didn't mean to say aloud slipped out.
Okay.
Does that make more sense to you?
I get it. It makes more sense because for me, my mind is me. I get what you're saying about the id and the ego.
Freud would disagree.
I get what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't ring true to me. So I thought he was just trying to make a rhyme work.
You're too well adjusted.
I think my family would tell you otherwise.
Gary Wenstrup, the acid years.
Anything else we want to say?
Yeah, I'll say this, just as an aside, and it means nothing, but I will tell you that I fixated on the song pretty early on in my experience of listening to Revolver. So we're talking in the 70s when I first was exposed to it. And it was always something I had a soft spot for. And then Ted Nugent recorded it.
Oh.
Are you aware of that?
I probably was and have forgotten it. It rings a very vague bell.
It's best forgotten, but yes. I remember thinking, oh shit, now it's been ruined. I can't enjoy it anymore. But luckily, his version came and went. Nobody remembered. It didn't supersede it, which was what I had expected when I first heard it. It's like, oh, damn, this is going to be the version I hear on the radio now. And it didn't. Kind of like there's a band out of Detroit you might be familiar with called Rockets.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Taking it back. All that I've been given.
See, because you're in Detroit, that might have been a local hit.
Yeah.
It didn't quite make it to Chicago. But what we knew them for was their cover of Fleetwood Mac's Oh Well.
Oh, okay.
You're familiar with that?
No, the Fleetwood Mac version, yes, not their version.
Really? You never heard the Rockets version of Oh Well?
I don't think so.
I heard that before I heard Fleetwood Mac's. And I remember thinking, oh, this is a good song. And then I heard the Fleetwood Mac version. It's like, holy shit, this is like amazing. And it made everybody forget the Rockets version. So, but there's always a fear that the inferior version will become the currency. And luckily, the good versions were the ones that kept their supremacy.
Do you find that it's almost always the first version you hear that becomes your favorite version, or can it be overruled by a later version?
That's a really good question. And I've asked myself that a lot. Do I like this just because I heard this first? A lot of times, the first version will stay the favorite. I have to question myself whether it's because it's the first version, but occasionally there will be instances where I'll hear another version later, whether it came first or it's just a different version, that I suddenly prefer over the more familiar one. To give you another example of the era, when Bob Welch did Sentimental Lady and remade it, and that became the big hit, lo and behold, oh, look, Bare Trees, he did the song earlier. I think it was on Bare Trees, but anyway. And then when I heard that, it's like, oh, I like this one better. It's less slick. I like what Christine McVie is singing on it, her counterpoint vocal. And so that became my favorite. But I would say if you were to break them down, the first probably more often than not stays the favorite, but not necessarily because it's the first. What about you?
Mostly the first rules.
Yeah.
As a Beatle example, I would say that maybe I'm amazed. The Wings Over America version, I really like that version. I don't think it trumps the first version, but it's in the same ballpark. Another example would be Light My Fire, Jose Feliciano, and The Doors. I think those are both equal and they stand on their own pretty well. But I'd say 90% of the time, the first version I hear is the one that I ultimately enjoy and stick with.
Those are good examples because they're two great songs that stand up in different versions. You know what I mean? It's like there's absolutely things I like about the Wings version over the first version and vice versa. I thought the Wings version was a little too slow, but I love the coda on it.
Yeah.
And the first one is more passionate, more edgy, and I like the tempo, but there's almost something missing from it that the one-man band thing, it's acceptable, but might have been enhanced by having a real band playing that song with him. That's what I tend to think. And Light My Fire, they're such two different animals that you can enjoy them both.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed. All right, should we move on to our silvers?
Yes.
Okay. Eleanor Rigby for me. The sound, the harsh, strident, sawing strings is a really get your attention sound. The lyric, as you mentioned, pulled together from many different sources and people, but it's great storytelling. Two sad, unfulfilled lives overlapping, this feeling of loneliness without end. Great lyrics.
The universality of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely different worlds these two people are living in, even though you can infer there's proximity, but they're sort of like parallel paths. They don't actually intersect until the very end when it's too late.
Yes, absolutely. And, it's very visual. The rice, you can see the rice, you can see darning the socks, you can see wiping dirt from the great visual cues in the lyric that really make it a story and bring it to life. I think an incredible piece of work. And so much ground is covered. You get this full story, you get this really incredible sound, and it's 2 minutes and 7 seconds. I mean, what they accomplish in 2 minutes is just incredible.
What a gut punch.
That's well put.
I mean, it's so dramatic. And this is the other thing about it, that it's funny how this is so against type when it comes to Paul McCartney, is that it is so unsentimental.
Absolutely.
In the same way that For No One is so stark. It's another gut punch. It's another thing that's like, there's no sugarcoating here, folks. It might be pretty. It's certainly compelling musically, easy on the ears. But boy, he's not going to soften the blow 1 inch on either one of these things.
That's a really good point, because that's his tendency, right? To find the silver lining of things.
That's the cliche for sure.
Yeah, and he doesn't go anywhere near it. Good point.
And the fact that it hangs together so well, it's so well incorporated, and you've got the disparate contributions to it lyrically. Ringo is the one who came up with darning his socks, the great visual, as you pointed out. George is credited with coming up with the hook. Look at all the lonely people.
Right. Which certainly sounds like George, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I look at you all. Yeah.
Right. He is an observer, as all good writers are. He is an observer. He's content to be in the background, but taking every bit of it in. And then you've got Pete Shotton, John's close childhood friend, who is still very tight with the Beatles then, coming up with the crossing paths at the end, Only in Death, that plot point, that Rod Serling aspect to the song, which is so perfect. And it's so funny that people will point to, out of all the hundreds of songs Lennon and McCartney are credited with, there's only 2 that John and Paul had a real beef with each other's versions of. This is one, and In My Life is the other. In Eleanor Rigby's case, till virtually his dying day, in the Playboy interview, he's claiming he wrote up to 70% of the lyrics for that, which is confirmed by absolutely no one, including his best friend, Pete Shotton, that he said, no, actually, John was going around the room just pissing on everybody's ideas. And what does seem true is that he was hurt, he said, by Paul, his supposed musical partner, basically taking input from anybody in the room. And he's very direct about this in the Playboy interview. He goes, now, Mel Evans, a former phone repairman, and, just dissing these people like, you're not songwriters. How dare you claim a piece of this great piece of work that you are so unqualified to contribute to. And yet here's Paul, the egalitarian guy. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's use that. So the end result, despite coming from all these people, is seamless. It doesn't like, oh, that's kind of jarring. That doesn't fit. No, it all is of a piece. It's unbelievable how something essentially written by committee holds together so well.
That's a good insight. Yeah, generally they don't hold together very well.
Not at all. And then you've got George Martin is like, oh, we used a quartet yesterday. I think an octet this time. And then the fact that they had liberty to revise their work before it reached the public. Here's a great example of that. It was recorded earlier on in the sessions. I think it was still April of 66 when they recorded Eleanor Rigby. June of 66, right before the finish line, George Martin comes up with the idea, hey, Paul, how would you like to lay down a counter melody at the last repeat of the chorus? You've already got the All the Lonely People, where do they come from? Lay down on top of that, look at all the lonely people. So you got those on top of each other. That came late in the sessions. They thought the song was wrapped, and George Martin had that idea. And he'd stuck that on there. What a perfect, musically powerful and intriguing thing to put on that arrangement. because they didn't have to rush it out the door 2 days after it was finished. So they thought. So it speaks to the power of their position that they had the liberty to do things like this, make adjustments. So yeah, I've not got enough good things to say about that song. And in fact, it was my gold, but that's fine. And I will say that as a single, I wondered if it was really single material coming out, especially juxtaposed with Yellow Submarine, which is basically a novelty song from the Beatles, but because it's Beatles, it's charming, everything, they pull it off. So I thought it was odd at the time, and when I did the book, researching what they had to say, because it wasn't their way to normally pull something from an album, put it out as a single.
Yeah, why did they do it here?
Well, the excuse they gave at the time was that they knew they had an album's worth of great material and that they knew other artists were going to flock to pull things and cover their songs. They thought, we might as well have the hit with it rather than give it away like that. They never did that again, not until it was Klein's decision to pull Something and Come Together from Abbey Road. But it seems an odd, to that point in their career, decision to make. I know that John was struggling for material at the time. So John comes out of the gate with Tomorrow Never Knows, and then it's like a sequence of things that he's got all ready to go. Andrew Bird Can Sing, and I'm Only Sleeping, I guess would have been one of the early ones they did too. Dr. Robert. But he has to struggle to come up with another tune on the album, which ends up being She Said, She Said, with a great deal of help from George. And that's how that ended up on the album. But that's how George ended up with 3 songs on the album too, is because John was having a hard time having spent himself early on. So if they had put out a concurrent single that wasn't on the album, I'm not really sure what it would have been, because John didn't have the surplus material and George got his 3 in. He had Isn't It a Pity around that time, but that's not exactly single material. And Paul, who knows? I'm sure he had his next 5-album quota already at least roughed out. So
yes, right.
Yeah, I don't know what they would have put out at the time. The other thing I was going to say is that Aaron Webber has suggested this, and there might be something to it, that John's memory of writing 70% of the lyrics might have come from Klein. Because when they met in January 1969 for the first time, and he's being wooed and seduced by him, and he goes, that man knew every word of every song I'd written. It's entirely possible Klein was the one that planted that seed, saying, and clearly you wrote this, leaving her face in a jar by the door, because it sounds like something John would say, right? And that might have planted saying, oh yeah, I did write that, didn't I? He's in heroin at that point and been an acid before that, so who the hell knows what his recall is, if anything, at that point. But I think it was only in the lyrics book that just came out from Paul, where he very specifically claims credit for that line, explaining it, which was the memory of his mother's use of Noxzema facial cream. That it was like a thing in the house that he had a very vivid memory of. And I could speak to that because that was like my grandmother's thing. And I can remember the smell of Noxzema we associated with visits to her. So it was a thing. And Paul's like, I wrote it and here's why.
What was your impression before knowing Paul's explanation? What did you think that line meant?
I thought it meant sort of a abstract way of saying you've got your private persona and your public persona.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's like, before I go out, I got to put this face on.
Yeah, gotcha.
So like putting on a show for the world, but it works both ways, right? If she's this inherently lonely, isolated figure, most people, even if you're living that life, don't want to project that to the world. Because if you do, that makes you something else.
One other observation about Eleanor Rigby is it's around this time or just prior that, wait, has the whole We're Bigger Than Jesus thing happened yet?
Well, the firestorm hadn't happened yet, but the quote had happened.
Oh, the quote had happened, but it hadn't sort of hit America yet.
Correct.
Okay, got it. So this song would be a great rebuttal to the Bigger Than Jesus thing if the timing had been a little bit different, because nobody is saved here. This is Christianity as cold comfort. So it would have been a great rebuttal to the Bigger Than Jesus thing. So I like the combination of the controversy that ensues when John makes those statements, and then Paul maybe pours some cold water on that fire with, here, think about this one.
Interesting. So like a pushback to the perception that they're anti-Christianity.
Well, not a pushback to that they're anti-Christianity, just making the point, well, maybe Christianity doesn't work. Nobody was saved here. She dies lonely. No one's listening to his sermons.
Yeah.
So what is it about Christianity that's so appealing?
That's a great observation. I've never seen anybody make that before, but in the context of 66, that makes complete sense. And furthermore, if you want to talk about the Maureen Cleave interviews, which is where the John Jesus quote came from, George has got a great quote in there where he's talking about Christianity, which, of course, because he's George and he's a silent, invisible Beatle, nobody picked up on it at all. But he says something like, I think if Christianity is that great, it should stand up to a bit of inspection. Something along those lines, like we should be able to critique it. If your belief system is as rock solid as you say it is, then let's kick the tires. Let's probe it a bit. Mm-hmm. What was he, like 23 years old at the time?
Yeah, great observation and absolutely true.
Yeah.
So Eleanor Rigby is your gold.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I think we need to tee up your silver.
Yes. So I don't want anybody to read anything from this that, what do you mean you didn't pick any John songs from Revolver? And I feel like I have in the Yesterday and Today discussion, so I've got that off my plate. I would say if we were allowed for ties here, that but we don't. My silver would be these two songs, but we don't. So I will skew to Paul's Got to Get You Into My Life as my silver.
Okay.
And the reason for that is it is a fantastic performance in a musical style they really hadn't trafficked in. This brass-driven R&B, bass-heavy. To that point in the Beatle catalog, they hadn't done anything like that before. And he so nails it, makes it his own. It's so exuberant. The energy is just off the charts. The one thing I lament is that, and this is the thing that I've tried to get to the bottom of, it's a personal experience that I know. It's like telling people you've seen a ghost and how do you prove it? That was your experience. And so it is. I wrote in the first book I ever did, I made mention of a mix of this song where the drums were prominent. And I've seen discussions on the Steve Hoffman forum. Well, what is he talking about? I don't know what he's talking about. And I've since gone back, tried to figure out, well, where is it? Because it was always sort of a vague thing in my own head that there's a mix of that song where the drums are most prominent, especially in the between verse fills, where they are inaudible on these standard releases. But you've got Ringo doing going from snare to tom, this solid drum fill that was always in my head as being quite prominent. So I was thinking, was it on the single? Is that where I heard it? And what I eventually figured out was that it was Apple label pressings. So they existed from 71 to 76 of the US Revolver album. And the taste test was when I was at a friend's house and I was having this discussion with another friend. We're all three hardcore Beatle guys. And the one hardcore Beatle guy who has way more of a deeper archive than I even do was like, what are you talking about? And so the second friend whose house we were at, who could pull it off the shelf, puts it on. And his stereo is in the basement. We're sitting upstairs. He plays the track loud and clear through the floorboards. You're hearing exactly what I'm talking about. And what is it? It's the Apple pressing of Revolver. And that's what I would have had in the 70s. And so that must have been where I heard it. Now, the Steve Hoffman people were referring to different mastering that might have made it more prominent. And maybe because your speakers were set in the corner of the room, it was enhanced or whatever. But in the actual official releases, it's never heard like that. And now we live in a world where all these fans are do-it-yourself engineers and demixers and all that stuff. So I'm thankful to say I've got a digital file of at least a good approximation of that you will hear now.
Wow, you did a lot of work to set that one up.
Because it's near and dear to me, you know?
I know. It's interesting. It's a criticism. I think it was a criticism that sort of struck deep, and you had to find.
Well, it's one thing to criticize me, but it's like, I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about.
End of part one. Intermission.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song performed by the Corgis. Something About the Beatles is an evergreen podcast.